All right, guys, welcome back to Half Rod's YouTube channel. So it's the next day, getting ready to get back on the front end wiring of Steve's 55 here. I'm trying to, get everything loomed up and tidied up to where it looks really, really clean. I want it to look really nice up here because, when there's so much detail in this engine compartment that, the wiring has to look good too. So I'm trying to follow that theme up of making it look really, really pristine. So it's gonna be a lot of work. I was getting pretty aggravated yesterday because I've got this non-split loom right here that I put on these two wires, because there's two wires going down, and that's for the turn signal, and then you got the upper two that go to the headlight. And that non-split loom is hard to get on there. You basically have to bunch it up and then scrunch it like an inchworm trying to get it on there, and it frays out on the end where it's cut. It starts fraying out, so the more you work with it and the more you have your fingers on it, the more it frays out. So you end up having to go around the back of it and cut all the fraying areas off and then slip it into the heat shrink. It's just a mess. Now I can tell you from personal experience, this loom stuff like this is the new modern style. It's weave or woven loom. It's not the old convoluted style, which I think is way outdated. This stuff I think looks better, but what they usually give you if you buy a kit, they usually just give you that felt or cloth style. It's like electrical tape, but it's cloth, and that stuff does not hold up very well to engine compartment heat. When the hood's down in the middle of the summer and it gets really, really hot in there, that stuff's just going to start falling off there. So I have started using heat shrink tubing on this and then shrinking it, and it'll stay on there and it looks good. So it's going to be very tedious trying to do all of this stuff, but I will tell you, when I was working on my wife's 55 four-door, I was working on mock-up in metal. I was in the metal stage, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to run her wiring harness. Now, I originally was going to leave her wiring harness just like factory. There's a rubber grommet down there in the firewall, and your wiring harness comes out and runs across the inner fender here in some steel clips. And I left all of this up here stock, and to me, if you're in metal stage on your 55, 56 Chevy, your wiring harness comes up here and it splits off behind the core support, so you can have a grouping go to this side, and then the other grouping comes up for this headlight, that park light and turn signal, and the horn. So they come through here, then they kick over. You have to buy the grommet set right here, the rubber grommet set. They sell it as a set. And there's a grommet there, there's a grommet there, and there's a grommet down here. Now you can see in the inner fender there's an existing hole with an indent right here, and there's also an existing hole with an indent here. Now one of the metal style clips went there, and I've got some little black plastic, you can see it right here, and then there'll be stainless Allen buttons on there holding that in there. So this will be pretty much like factory. But anyway, I think now, after doing this on Steve's car, which this looks fine, this is going to look really clean when this has the loom on it and everything. But I think on my wife's car, I'm going to go ahead and weld up these holes and those down there and put filler pieces in here where it's all smooth and flat, instead of having these kicks in it where these are indented down in there. And I think I'm going to drill the same exact size hole that grommet goes in, and I'm going to put it back here on the back side of the inner fender back here. That way the wires can go up through there and go in behind and to all that stuff, instead of having all this stuff exposed up here. I think it'd look cleaner without it. So anyway, now on the horn, I'm going to do her car like I did my hardtop. I drilled a hole and I put a grommet in it, and the wire runs out this way and to that. That way you don't see a whole lot of wire. But now this, on Steve's car, this is just like the factory done it, other than it's modernized, and it looks clean. It's just fine. But there's a lot of ways to hide wiring on a car, and hiding wiring is really a neat way of getting a real clean look under the hood. I guess I can show you mine and show what I did on mine. All right, so you'll have to pardon the dust because this car is dusty. So all the wiring is hidden on my car. I filled in all those weird indents and the holes and everything. There's not even any holes or anything in the inner fenders, so this is all clean. There's nothing really exposed. So I made my own baffle plates here out of pretty thick steel plate, and then I welded studs on the back so they go through the existing holes in the firewall and they have nuts on the back. But that made this panel completely clean with no hardware. But there's no wiring kicking through and over and down. Now when I did my cold air system on my air cleaner here, that tube coming in with the filter up top, this is where the horns are supposed to go, is up high. So I had to mount mine down low. So that's why mine might look a little bit different. But what I done on mine was, there's a rubber grommet in the horn bracket right there, and that's all you see of the wiring right here. That's it. And then there's another grommet in this plate with the wire going through that. So to me it looks very clean and sanitary. You don't see anything. Now my wiring comes out of my firewall and goes into the back side of the inner fender with a convoluted rubber boot, and then I've got bolts welded into the back side of the inner fender, so the wiring comes up all the way to the top on the inside of the back side of the inner fender, all the way up here. Now in the inner fender right here, the inner fender panel, this core support is hollow underneath. So I did a hole in the side of that inner fender and have those reproduction rubber grommets just like on Steve's car. And then I welded bolts to the bottom of the core support off to one side, so I have loom clamps bolted down under there. So my wiring is behind the inner fender up at the top in loom clamps with bolts I welded on there. Then the wiring splits off and goes into here, and then there's another hole in this inner fender with a grommet going to that stuff. But if you ever was trying to figure out how you can hide wiring on a 55, 56 Chevy, that's how you can do it. It's just one of the ways. But pretty much the sky's the limit when you're in your metal stage and you got a MIG welder and some steel laying around. You can do just about anything you want to, but to me it just looks better not having wiring exposed. But this is a modern style, resto mod like you see normally in magazines and it shows and stuff. This is just the normal, hidden wiring and that type of stuff. Now Steve's car in particular, he's going for, the classic style and the classic look. It's not lowered, it doesn't have giant wheels on it and all that kind of stuff. So this is perfect for this. But if Steve's car was in bare metal and I was doing all the paint and body and all that stuff on the car, I would have probably do it about the same way on his car, just to hide the wiring to make it look a lot more sanitary. But anyway, I have had quite a few questions. I even had an email, it was about 3 months ago, and the guy wanted me to tell him how I hid the wiring on my hardtop. So to me it's easier to do a video than it is to explain it, because I did type out in the email for the guy and told him everything. But seeing how I did it, me talking about it, describing it in person is different than me trying to type it out on an email, which he may not have understood it. It's kind of hard to explain things because I don't know, I see it in my head a certain way, but that person may not. I don't know. But this is still going to look very, very nice in here, man. I'm very proud of it. It's got to look good, you know what I mean? The factory, all they had was a wiring harness that went out of that grommet and come right across here like this, and all they did was black electrical tape the whole harness. How would you like to have been the person back in the day in the 50s that all you did all day for work was wrap wiring harnesses with electrical tape? Can you imagine? Anyway, we're not doing wrapped electrical tape here on this one, I can tell you that. Alright guys, so this came in the mail today. This little jewel was $8 because the shipping was just as much as the part, basically. I mean, this is probably like a $2 or $3 little part, but by the time you pay shipping and their tax and all that crap. Anyway, I got this rubber boot, and this is for the 2 alternator power wires right here. So I've got to take the nut back off, and I got to slip this boot over these eyelets and then stick it back on there, tighten the nut down, and then run the boot on. Now there's a plastic isolator that's a little bit bigger around than the casting boss on the alternator, and that's what kind of holds these in place on the back of the alternator. So anyway, that'll go on about like that, and it'll look really, really nice. All right, I got the little boot on there. Looks pretty good. Really happy with that. So now, when changing spark plugs or something, we can arc across that and have a sparkler going on. All right, guys, so I popped the headlight out of the 55 here, the bucket and all. Took it all out as one unit. Anyway, they painted the headlight bucket. They left all the undercoating and all that crap, whatever that is, all over the bottom of it. Just painted over it, which is fine. At least it's not crusty looking, you know what I mean? They did put a gasket on the back of the bucket. There's supposed to be a gasket that goes in between the headlight bucket and the headlight. And they did put that on, but there was no grommet for the pigtails for the wiring for the headlights. These were just hanging out. And that wouldn't have taken long before that chafed on that steel bucket right there on that sharp edge and, you know, shorted it out. Now, the pigtails that were on there are still, they still look kind of good, but I'm not going to use them because we got brand new headlight plugs, both of them with the easy wire harness. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace them. Now, these are kind of a tricky thing for me on a 55 Chevy, and the reason is, originally they have this rubber grommet that goes in here, and it's pretty big and bulky, and it snaps in there, and then your wires are going through a rubber grommet. But it also seals everything up nice, because you can imagine when you're driving down the road, all that tire, you know, if you're driving in the rain, it's throwing water all up in this inner fender. And that's why that seal needs to be on the bucket, and that's why you need a grommet here, because that stuff will seep in through there and run down the front of the car. So anyway, it needs a grommet in it. Now, the problem is if you ever try to take one of these cars apart, and we may be painting this car in the future. This may be a project for me like 10 or 15 years from now. It may not even be that long, I don't know. But I told Steve I wanted to build a shop first, but we talked about possibly taking the paint all the way down to metal and bringing it back. You know, the paint job that's on the car is okay, but it's got a few issues here and there. But anyway, when you go to tear one of these cars down, the pigtail for this does not fit through that bucket hole. So even if you pop the grommet out, that's not big enough for that to go through. So what I've always done in the past is I've used these insulated male and female spades, crimped them on here and on the wiring here, and they were just connected right here. So I didn't really like doing it that way, but that's just the way I always did it. And then that way, when you tear your car apart later, or if you have an accident and your fender gets damaged, you have to take the car apart, you can actually get the wiring one wire at a time out of the rubber grommet in the inner fender right here. There's a grommet, and you can pop that grommet out, and you can pull every one of those little connectors out separately right there. So anyway, I don't like the idea of these insulated, even though they're insulated, they're hard plastic, you know what I mean? I don't like them hanging out here in the wind. So I'm trying to think of a way here to do this a little bit differently. And I think I come up with a plan. Now, there's one thing here. When you get these wiring pigtails, there's 3 wires. One of them's black. That's your ground. That has to be grounded. Well, your easy wire harness does not have a ground wire going to it. So this needs to be grounded to the body, which I usually just ground it to the bucket. So what I think I've decided I'm going to do is I'm going to use these connectors. I had to go to Tractor Supply and buy a set of them because I didn't have any. I had some mix match ones, but I don't want to mix match. I can't do that. I'm not the guy that can put mix match bolts and screws and connectors and all that kind of stuff in. I just can't do it. So I went and got a set of these, male and female insulated. I think what I'm going to do, because this headlight, it fits into that bucket like that, and there's a little bit of space back here in this bucket. So what I'm going to do is drill an 1/8 inch hole in here, and I'm going to put a screw, a stainless screw with a star washer, and I'm going to put just an eyelet, crimp an eyelet on the end of this ground, so that will be connected to the bucket on the inside. Now I'm going to leave these wires this long, and then I'm going to put the connectors on, the male and females, on the wires, you know, from the harness to these pigtails. And the idea is, which I'm going to trim this down, it won't be that long. The idea is when you take the headlight out of the car, if you leave the bucket in there, you can pull the headlight out, and that wiring, I'll have it spooled up in here a little bit because there's plenty of room. But you'll be able to pull the headlight out enough to reach back there and undo the plug-in. Or if you had to pull the wiring out of the inner fender, you can just undo these connectors one at a time, and they'll be inside this, protected a little bit. So anyway, just an idea I haven't done one this way yet, but I think I'm going to do it on Steve's car here. Now, we don't have the grommets for the headlights, and I went in there and I looked online, and they're about 10 bucks. So you know, there's going to be shipping and tax and all that kind of crap on there to order them. So I went through my grommet bucket here, and I've actually found a couple of plugs that, these are soft rubber plugs. I can actually drill a hole in the end of that for the wires to go through. But anyway, I can snap that in there and it'll be grommeted. But the thing about it, this is what I'm trying to decide. I do have some grommets that'll fit the existing hole, or I can use that step bit and then open it up 2 sizes, and this one will actually fit in there. But at that point, the pigtail will come out of the back of that bucket. So this is kind of my dilemma here. I don't want those connectors hanging out here in the air. You know what I mean? Up in there when the water and everything's kicking up off the tire and rocks and all that kind of stuff. If I'm going to use connectors, I'd rather have them inside here where they have just a little bit of, you know, protection from the stuff from the inner fender coming in. Now, no doubt water will get up in there from around the headlight and all that getting down in there and stuff, but with these being, you know, they're designed to fit inside each other pretty tight, you know, it'll be a pretty good connection. So anyway, I think that's the way I'm going to go here. That's going to have to be, I mean, I want to try to use stuff that I have here instead of ordering parts again, you know what I mean? It slows the build down every time I have to order something, and it's, you know, it's $10 here, $10 there, $10 here, and it keeps adding up. And them stupid connectors at Tractor Supply for this pack was $9.99. I could have probably got those off Amazon for probably $3, you know what I mean? But my Tractor Supply is pretty expensive. I don't know about you guys's, but it is handy having it just right next to the housing edition. All right, so I did this one in a way that if the car was ever completely disassembled, no wiring would have to be cut and spliced. That was kind of what I was after there, and not spend any more money, you know, on grommets and that type of stuff. So I used some plugs that I had that were solid, so I had to drill a hole to make the wires fit. Anyway, I pulled the harness through to here. It's got just a little bit of slack on the backside, not very much. And anyway, I put on some connectors here, and I did one male and one female, and then I did them, you know, opposite on this one. So when this goes to be put back together at any time by anybody in the future, you can't mix them up, because like the plug has a male and female and the wiring has male and female. Instead of putting 2 males here and 2 females here, you could cross the wires, which, you know, they're color coded, so it'd be hard to do, but just in case, I did it opposite. Now I left them just a little bit long, and that way these wires can be coiled up in here in a circular motion, and then the headlight bucket can be put on, because there's a lot of empty space back here at the back. So I did a 1/8 inch hole. I drilled an 1/8 inch hole in there and put a Phillips screw in there. It's a stainless, and I did a star washer under it. I've got an assortment of stainless star washers that I got from eBay a few years ago. And anyway, so that has a star washer on it. If you do a ground with a screw, it really needs a star washer on it. But anyway, I think this will work out really nice. And this way, you know, if the wiring has to be pulled out of the car for any reason, or, you know, when the car is taken apart for repainting or whatever in the future, if it needs anything, that plug can be popped out of the back, and these wires can be pulled out of the bucket, and then this rubber grommet can be pulled out, and every bit of those plugs can come out of there. So I just think this is just a decent little way to go here. But anyway, back to it. All right. Well, the other thing on these brand new headlight rings, they usually come with a seal. that goes in the bucket on the, or the ring on the back side, and it seals the headlight ring to the trim ring. Anyway, they didn't put them on there, and they were probably in the box with the chrome headlight ring. Not a big deal. I mean, it'll be okay, but anyway, if I had them, I'd put them on there, but I don't. So anyway, I'm getting ready to do the other side. I've already put the grommet in and drilled the hole in it for the wires, and then I drilled the hole in the back side for the Phillips screw with the star washer on it. That is going to be the ground. So what I'm using are just regular little eyelets to put the screw through, and this had that red cheesy plastic insulator on it, and I just pulled it off there. Now this has a seam right down the middle of it, so I'm going to use my American Auto Wire crimpers on it, and I'll show you what it looks like after it's crimped on. It does it just like the factory would have done it. I got a little piece of heat shrink I'm going to put on it, just to kind of help protect the copper wire from the, you know, getting any of it exposed. Every little bit will help, you know. Alright, so there is the wire after it's crimped on with the American Auto Wire. So I love those pliers, this crimping tool. It's just so awesome. You know, you get a connector that has a seam down it like that, just a standard old cheapy connector, and use that point on that one side of that and crimp it, and it'll fold it in there just like factory. And anyway, I'll put that heat shrink over it pretty far and then heat it up and try to get it to go down on that copper, just to kind of help protect it from moisture, you know. And there's the heat shrink on it. So it pretty much sealed off the end of the copper there a little bit, you know. It's, I mean, every little bit helps, I think, but you really don't even need to heat shrink your grounds, but I do. This looks more professional, I think. But anyway, now I'll coil that up in there, and I'll screw that in there for the ground, and then get this set up in there and get this headlight wired up. It is all wired up here now, so that's pretty awesome. Well, I take that back. I still got to wire up the turn signals and the park light. There's two wires on each side that I have to plug in. There is male and female spades on the off the park light, and I am going to shorten that up and put new connectors on there. But anyway, I had both headlights out, modified the buckets with grounds and all that kind of stuff, and put them all back in. But this is what it looks like after it's all back in there. I've got the harness. I got the little T connector on here, which I don't really like. It's too small. I was hoping the T connector would be a lot bigger, but I mean, it's fine. It clipped on there, it'll work. But anyway, it comes off, goes off the back of the core support over there, and I'm probably going to put a loom clamp in the center, but this fan shroud kicks up. It has a height thing on it, so I'm going to wait until I get that fan shroud placed, then I'm going to put a clamp on there. But for now, it's looking really nice, man. I'm happy with that. Looks good. Very, very clean install, I think. But I'm biased. Thanks for watching.